The vast, cracked earth of New Mexico held memories in its dry seams, memories Captain Elias Vance had tried for 3 years to outrun. The desert sun, that relentless, impartial eye, beat down on his small, struggling ranch, a patch of stubborn green defiance in an ocean of brown. It was a penance, this place, chosen for its distance from both civilization and the ghost of his former command. He'd traded his cavalry blues for faded denim, his saber for a plowshare, and the respect of men for the suspicious silence of neighbors who knew a broken soldier when they saw one. The nightmares of Sand Creek, where orders had turned to butchery under a white flag, were his only constant companions. He saw the faces in the swirling dust, heard the screams in the wind that rattled his tin roof. His atonement was this solitude, this daily battle with the land, and the quiet hope that he might one day forget the man he had been. Her arrival was not an event, but a gradual emergence, like a mirage solidifying under the noon sun. He first noticed the missing food, a few strips of jerky, a handful of beans from the sack in the shed. Then, the disturbed earth near the well, signs of someone digging for roots. He felt a familiar, cold vigilance return, the soldier's instinct not yet buried. He set a trap not of steel, but of compassion, a bowl of stew and a full canteen left on a flat rock at the edge of his cleared land, far from the house. The next morning, they were gone, the bowl licked clean. This silent exchange continued for a week. He never saw her, only felt her presence, a whisper in the mesquite, a flicker of movement in the corner of his vision. The day he finally saw her, his heart stopped. She was drawing water from his well, her back to him. She was Apache, tall and whip-thin, her hair a ragged curtain of black. She wore the tattered remnants of a dress that might have once been white, now the color of the desert. But it was the scars that held his gaze, vicious, crisscrossing lines on her bare arms and back, the unmistakable signature of a whip. A runaway. From the reservation, or worse, from some hellish captivity. As if feeling his stare, she turned. Her face was young, perhaps not yet 20, but her eyes were ancient, holding a flat, survivalist emptiness that was more terrifying than any hatred. She didn't flee. She simply looked at him, the empty bucket in her hand, a challenge in her hollow gaze. Elias slowly raised his own hands, showing them empty. "It's all right," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "The water's yours. The food too." She said nothing, her eyes darting to the rifle leaning against the porch post. In that moment, he saw not a threat, but a reflection, 2 survivors, one haunted by what he'd done, the other by what had been done to her. He named her Grace, for no reason he could explain, and the name stuck in his mind. She became a shadow on his ranch, a silent partner in his exile. He left out food, tools, even a spare blanket as the nights grew cold. She took them, never with thanks, but with a swift, efficient practicality. Sometimes, he'd find a gift in return, a perfectly shaped arrowhead left on his chopping block, a bundle of rare medicinal herbs tied with grass by his door. A language without words. He began to talk to her, not expecting a response, just voicing the thoughts that choked him in the silence. He spoke of the desert's beauty at dawn, the stubbornness of his mule, the weight of the memories he carried. She would listen, often hidden, her presence a quiet pressure in the air. The turning point came with the rattlesnake. He was repairing a fence when he heard the dry, furious buzz at his boot. He froze, the old battlefield calm settling over him. Before he could move, an arrow hissed past his ear, so close he felt the wind of it, and pinned the snake's. Grace stood 20 yards away, a simple bow in her hand, her expression unchanged. She lowered the bow, walked over, retrieved her arrow with a sharp tug, and disappeared back into the brush. She had saved his life. That evening, he didn't leave food on the rock. He set a place at his rough table, 2 plates, 2 cups. He cooked a proper meal, stew and cornbread. And he waited. As twilight bled into indigo, she appeared in the doorway. She had washed, and her dark hair was wet. She looked at the set table, then at him, her eyes searching his face for a trap. Finding none, she sat. They ate in silence, the clink of tinware the only sound. Afterward, she did not leave. She helped him wash the dishes, her movements precise. When he lit the lantern, she flinched from the sudden flame, a violent, involuntary spasm that spoke of deeper horrors. He turned the wick low. "You can stay," he said, gesturing to the cot he'd made up by the fire. "The floor's warmer than outside." She looked at the cot, then at him, and gave a single, sharp nod. That night, he awoke to the sound of muffled weeping. Grace was on the cot, trapped in a nightmare, her body clenched, tears streaming silently down her face. Without thinking, Elias crossed the room. He didn't touch her. He simply sat on the floor beside the cot and began to speak in a low, steady monotone. He told her about the constellations visible through the window, Orion the hunter, who was also a story of betrayal and loss in some myths. He talked about the phases of the moon, the way the coyotes sang to it. He spoke until her breathing evened and the tears stopped. When dawn came, she was awake, watching him. "You spoke to the night," she said, her voice a rusty, unused instrument. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. "It was listening," he replied. Her name was Kai, which meant willow tree in her tongue, she told him days later. She had been taken from her family after a raid, sold to a brutal miner in the hills who used her for labor and for other, darker purposes. The scars were his marks. She had killed him in his sleep, taken a horse, and ridden until it died, then walked until she found his ranch. "You are not like the others," she stated, not as a compliment, but as a clinical observation. "Your eyes hold ghosts, but your hands do not seek to make more." As the weeks melted into months, a fragile routine built itself. Kai's strength returned. She could outwork him in the fields, her knowledge of the land putting his to shame. She showed him how to find water signs, which plants could heal and which could kill. He taught her to read English from his few books, and she devoured the words with a fierce hunger. The ranch began to thrive. Laughter, genuine and startling, sometimes broke the silence. The ghost of Sand Creek still visited Elias at night, but now, sometimes, Kai would be there when he woke gasping, her presence a silent anchor in the storm of his guilt. They were two shattered vessels, leaning together to hold a little water. The idol shattered with the arrival of Marshal John Halsey and two deputies. They came on lathered horses, dust-coated and grim. "Captain Vance," Halsey said, not bothering to dismount, his eyes scanning the prosperous homestead with suspicion. "Heard you've made something of yourself out here. Also heard you might be harboring a runaway Apache woman. Property of a Mr. Donovan up Silver Creek Way. He's making noise. Says she's a thief and a murderer." Elias felt Kai freeze behind him, just inside the doorway, a shadow among shadows. His old self, the officer, calculated coolly. Denial was useless. Halsey would search. "Donovan's dead," Elias said, his voice flat and final. "The woman here is under my protection." The lie hung in the air, audacious and complete. Halsey's eyes narrowed. "Your wife. Ain't heard about no wedding, Captain." "Apache custom," Elias replied, not blinking. "Binding as any preacher's words out here. She's not going back to Silver Creek. You can tell Donovan to take his claim to the devil." He saw the calculation in Halsey's eyes, the hassle, the potential for violence with a former cavalry officer, the thin legal ice of owning a person who was now claimed as a wife. The marshal spat a stream of tobacco. "This ain't over, Vance. You're dancing on a razor." But he turned his horse, and they rode away. When the dust settled, Elias turned. Kai stood in the doorway, her face a mask of stunned conflict. "You named me wife," she said, the words heavy. "It was the only shield I had," he admitted, the weight of his declaration crashing down on him. It was more than a tactic, in speaking it, he had wished it to be true. "It is a shield that becomes a cage," she whispered, but there was no anger in her eyes, only a profound, weary understanding. That night, they faced each other in the lamplight, the pretense stripped away. "I cannot give you what a real wife should," he began, the ghosts of Sand Creek howling at the edges of his mind. "I am broken, Kai. And I am scarred, inside and out," she answered, stepping closer. "We are not whole people, Elias. But perhaps two broken halves can make a whole shelter." He reached out, his calloused fingers tracing not the scars on her arm, but the unmarked skin beside them, a map of what had survived. Her hand came up to cover his, her touch warm and solid. The kiss, when it came, was not a firework, but a slow sunrise, tentative, healing, a promise of a dawn they thought they'd never see. It was the kiss of survivors, not of lovers, a pact written in breath and touch against the cruelty of. The next morning, they rode into the small town of Cedar Fork. They stood before the bewildered justice of the peace, a man who knew Elias only as the quiet, haunted rancher. Kai wore a simple, clean dress Elias had bought for her. She spoke her vows in clear English, her eyes never leaving his. He spoke his voice trembling not with fear, but with a relief so deep it felt like salvation. The paper they signed was not just a legal document, it was a flag planted on their shared ground, a declaration to the world and to themselves. They returned to the ranch as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. The land no longer looked like a penance, but like a promise. Elias looked at Kai, his wife, a woman of immense strength and quiet grace who had walked out of hell and, in doing so, had pulled him back from his own. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "The ghosts are still there," he murmured, "but they are quieter now." "They will always be there," she said, looking out at their land. "But now they must speak over the sound of our life together." In the vast, forgiving silence of the desert, two lost souls had finally come home, not to a place, but to each other, building a future not on the ashes of the past, but on the hard, redeemed earth of the present.